the idea that Trump was a kinder, gentler Trump is also like an insane. Like he ran a masks off campaign. Like no, I'm gonna say that the election was stolen. I'm gonna
poison in the blood of the country.
The poison in the blood of the country. Like and that his closing Madison Square Garden, full Trump. It was full. Here's what you're gonna get. Whatever it was in the vibes, whatever it was about when they saw him in short little bursts, they were like, yeah, he's still a little bit of crazy, but he seems more chill this time. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Focus Group podcast. I'm Sarah Longwell, publisher of The Bulwark, and this week we're digging into why a critical slice of voters have warmed up to Donald Trump after passing him over twice. One thing that was clear is that these first-time Trump voters weren't just casting a vote against Democrats. It's not just negative polarization at work. So we're going to go deeper into the worldview of this particular kind of voter and what they found appealing about giving Trump a shot this time around. We'll also be checking in with these voters a lot more going forward to see if they are still happy with their choice as the Trump administration goes on. So keep an eye on this podcast feed. My guest this week has spent a lot of time around Trump world over the last year. Marc Caputo, national political reporter for The Bulwark, at least for a little while longer. Hey, Marc, what's up? You were muted, Marc.
Ha! Ha! Am I still muted? Am I like, is this thing on? This is embarrassing.
Marc Caputo.
This is embarrassing.
Has been the biggest, the most flagrant abuser of the mute button. He's always on mute. Every time you talk to him, he's on mute.
Everyone, am I still muted, by the way?
Oh, we can hear you. No, we can hear you.
I was like, I'm a low budget, low quality, low tech kind of guy, and I'm still adjusting to the Yeti microphone. That was embarrassing.
Oh my gosh!
Is this thing on?
Is this
as
thing
people
on?
of my generation ask?
Yeah,
fumbling around for my cane and ear horn.
Well, Marc, thanks for coming back. We're gonna miss you over here at the Bulwark. You've been a great reporter for us. I hope they appreciate you over in Axios.
Well, I hope they do too, and I'm certainly going to miss being here. To be very clear,
yeah, we're the best.
This is
we're
great.
the best.
So far, yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, indeed.
Okay, so I want to start on some of the cabinet stuff that's in the news. We're going to get to all the sound, but. And I'm just going to warn people to stay to play. Some of this could change before this comes out because we're taping on Monday. It's going to come out on Saturday, and who knows?
Oh my God!
Happen.
Wait a minute. There's like a 5-day lead time here.
I know, right?
Oof.
Like the whole cabinet could be different by the time this comes out.
Oh yeah, we could be a nuclear war by now. Who knows? Anyway.
So, in general terms, we just walk me through how people in the Trump world are thinking about. The trouble some of these cabinet picks are facing, like Matt Gaetz, RIP, and Pete Hegseth. He let Gaetz bow out. So how committed is he going to the mat for someone like Hegseth?
How committed was he going to the mat for Hegseth? Not that committed. That's why Trump, who's, he's that meme of the guy looking over his shoulder at the other woman, is always sort of looking at the other possible pick, right? And that other woman in this case, using the meme term, by the way, not any other inference.
Not talking about real woman.
Yes, indeed. Ron DeSantis was playing the part of the new desiderata. How about that? But since that period of time, last week or so, 10 days ago or so, Hegseth has sort of stabilized. He had a number of good days toward the end of his first week. The Trump team views that first week as being utter importance. He survived. And they believe that the more time that goes by, the higher Hegseth's chances are for confirmation. Now, Hegseth is sort of the new tip of the spear. The original tip of the spear for the more troublesome or controversial cabinet picks was Gaetz. He's gone. Hegseth looked like Gaetz 2.0, but he's hanging around. Then you've got Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard, and RFK. But so far, the feeling in Trump world is good. And then on Monday, they got the real boost from Tom Cotton, the Arkansas senator. He plays a really important role in the Senate as sort of the man in the middle of the Republican conference. You have sort of the new young Turks that are more populist and more MAGA, certainly symbolized by JD Vance. But, in that pool, and you can't really call Rick Scott young, the Florida center, but
Sure.
both Rick Scott, Marco Rubio are there. Josh Hawley is there. Senator Lee from Utah. They're all in that sort of
based
camp.
Mike Lee, sure.
Based Mike Lee, and that they're sort of the anti-McConnell, sort of more conservative neocon GOP. And
Are they
Cotton,
the neocons? Are they the
that's
neocons?
why I put it in I don't know. That's why I put it in like serious air quotes, right? And in between them is Tom Cotton. And so Cotton has a kingmaker quality to him in the Senate GOP conference. And when he said that he expects all of Trump's appointees to be confirmed at that point, that's a kind of a, in at least in Trump's transition team's view, that's a big step forward for them, because they think that means they got the votes, or that if they don't have them, they're going to get them for all these folks.
So I think obviously Murkowski, Collins, those are tough. Yeah, they're not going to vote for a lot of these people, so they can only lose one or two more votes, right? So who are the other folks who might be resistant? Because we forget sometimes that there's a bunch of these people that Mike Rounds you don't hear about a lot, but he's there being normal, or
Roger
normal-ish.
Roger Wickers, when you think of the Mississippi Center, when you think of sort of your more traditional GOP who might not be so cool with Tulsi Gabbard, right? Or maybe even Kash Patel.
Yeah, or like a Curtis might not be, right? The guy replacing Romney.
Good question, man. Oh yeah, he during Gates was seen as kind of a hard no.
Yeah.
And since Trump had not endorsed him, he doesn't really owe much to Trump. They're there. And generally the Trump team does view McConnell as a close fellow traveler of Collins and Murkowski. So they kind of perpetually mark him in the probably third category. He can only, they can only lose 4, right? Because they got a 53 Senate majority. JD Vance can cast a tie-breaking vote, blah, blah, blah. So those, in the case of Hegseth, the central player there is Joni Ernst. I would imagine, dangerous prediction, that by assuming Hegseth doesn't drop out, I know that sounds crazy to then say the next thing, that Joni Ernst will signal support ultimately for Hegseth. I'm just guessing because the amount of pressure that's being brought to bear on her from MAGA-world, and that's if Joni Ernst is seeking re-election. Maybe if she doesn't seek re-election, which is this cycle or this coming cycle in 2026, it might be a different matter, but she is. So, she's played an important role in sort of gumming up the Hegseth confirmation. But again, there is just this feeling that things are starting to trend in Trump's direction. It's a feeling 4 or 5 days from now, who knows?
All right. Appreciate that roundup. But I want to get into the meat of the show here and talk about how these Biden to Trump voters talked about their switch in November, because obviously one of the reasons that Trump is able to jam through, or people are starting to say like, yeah, let's give Trump what he wants, is because there's this perception, right? Like he won not just this perception, but like he won the popular vote. He won all 7 swing states. And even though ultimately his popular vote margin's down to about 1.4%, these senators are sort of key. They view him as having the imprimatur of the American people in such a way that he can go ahead and do these things. So many of these, go ahead.
Yeah, well, related to that, what's really interesting about this focus group is that these are these Biden voters who voted Trump, and a lot of them say the things, and in some cases express the support for RFK and Tulsi Gabbard, who are 2 of those nominees. They play crucial roles, both when I listen to this focus group, and crucial roles in Trump's view and the Trump team's view in getting him elected, and they say in going forward and governing. So yeah, I mean, there's a close connection between those 2.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that I guess I want to emphasize is that we have talked on this show to a lot of Trump to Biden voters, people who had voted for Trump in 2016 and Biden in 2020. That's a different kind of voter, really, than these Biden to Trump voters. And let me tell you, I don't mean these are people who like voted for Trump and then they voted for Biden and now they're back to Trump. That's not really who these people are. These are people who they're just kind of Democrats, or they've been a kind of Democrat, a kind of anti-institutionalist Democrat who now find themselves not Republicans exactly, but red-pilled and MAGA-fied.
Right.
And I want you to hear how they sound, because I really think that this ended up being the kind of independent voter who broke for Trump and kind of gave him his margin. So let's listen.
He just took the reins while it just felt like she was just there, like in and out, popping out, saying like, "Oh, hey, vote for me," and then she would just leave. Okay, that's it, bye. But with him, he stood his ground, spotlight always on him, and I think that's definitely how it should be if you want to be president. We need to hear you. We need to see you. You are the voice of us, okay? You will be listening to us. You're basically a servant of the American people.
He did seem kind of divisive. He does tend to get people pretty angry and pretty worked up. But on the other side of that coin he is who he is. He's not fake. Like some people hide behind a mask, you know who he is. But he does tend to say some pretty abrasive stuff, and it's questionable.
I'm a New Yorker, so I really didn't like him before. I thought he was too much, too show off. And I didn't have confidence that he could, like he said, have the finger on the trigger, on the button. But mention, I went back to my hometown. I went back to New York City last month, and I couldn't believe. I'm like, oh, what? It doesn't even look like my city. I'm like, that's my city. I felt unsafe, and I was, armed. I'm like, how did they destroy the city in 4 years? What happened? Then my friends, so obviously are law enforcement, and attorneys and whatnot. They're like, okay, well, our hands are tied. We cannot do anything because they have more rights than we do. And I'm like, okay, well, that's the reason why I'm voting is that. And also, not just do our hands tied as law enforcement, but now you're bringing a bunch of criminals through the border, and then we have to deal with that. And like, okay, no, enough is enough. And that's the only reason why I voted for Trump. Mm-hmm. Yeah, border and law. The abortion and everything, it's on you. You want to have 20, that's on you. I'm very open-minded when it comes to that. However, we're talking about New York City. I mean, it's a mess. Oh my God, it looks dark, poor. I thought I was in Detroit, Michigan. I'm like, what happened to my city? And too much liberalism, and it has to stop. That's why I voted for the guy. Not that I love him or I like him or nothing. And I'm voted for him, and I'm holding him to his word. We're going to have law and order. Without law and order, there's nothing. There's no peace. There's nothing.
I think that he's a piece of shit. I think he's crazy. I think he lies. I think he's just a horrible human being. But like, I have to admit, like, as much as I hate Donald Trump, when he was in office, I saw more in my paycheck. The prices were down. Things were better. Hate was up. Of course, hate was up, but I could afford to live at that point. And these past 4 years dramatically made things so much tougher.
I kind of agree with what several people said, that there's some things I don't like about Trump personally, but I do believe he really does love his country, and he does intend to improve the way things are. And I also like the fact that Trump has quite a really good team assembled so far. And I think it's only going to get better. So it's not just him, it's also his team.
To me, Harris was Biden 2.0. We were going to get exactly the same thing for the next 4 years. And he talked about ending the Ukraine war in 2 days. Now, whether that's possible or not, I don't know. But he's in a position where he can tell Zelensky, I'm not going to give you any more bullets unless you give back Donbass and just let them have it. Whatever his plans are. He had plans, whereas Harris' campaign, all I ever heard was abortion.
When he got shot, actually, it told me that someone really didn't want him to be in place. And usually when someone's trying to keep someone away that bad, that means they're possibly going to be that good. So, and I'm not really a fan of the wars and everything that has been started, and even the side that America has taken as it relates to some of the wars. So he will definitely do something different there.
I think that last woman is indicative of a kind of low social trust voter that's a new part of the GOP coalition. And so, Mark, you were following the Trump campaign for the whole, campaign and talking to them. Was there did they have like a clear sense in Trump world that they were trying to build a different coalition in 2024 than they were in 2016 and 2020? And do the results sort of match their expectations? Like, do you feel like the people that they've gotten, when you listen to these voters, do you hear like, yep, this is exactly who Trump thought he was going to be able to pull?
Yes. It's surprising that one of the things that impressed me just listening to all of these different people talk is it sounds like it's the focus group for Trump when they were working on these types of voters. And obviously they were able to turn them out. What you hear in aggregate when you listen to everyone here, and this is just one segment of the electorate, right? These are the former Biden turned Trump voters. They represent the unraveling, the unwinding, the disaggregation, the disintegration, the digitization of our society and the way in which the mainstream media and media operates. Because you can hear all of these people have just these very different sources of information that they are gravitating toward, and that don't use kind of the mainstream media as a filter. And when you hear them talk, like the one woman talking about what attracted her to Trump, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, was that he got shot at because it meant that there was essentially, and I'm again paraphrasing here, this cabal that was trying to get at him. That is stuff that you don't hear in mainstream media, but you hear in social media, you hear in alternative media, and they hit their targets.
Yeah, this is all over the focus groups, this particular sentiment of, especially, when Trump was getting indicted or when they went into Mar-a-Lago to get the documents back because he was refusing to turn them over, all the classified documents. One of the things I just heard over and over again from a lot of these sort of Trump sympathetic voters was, man, they must really be afraid of him. The deep state must really be scared of him. Somebody must really want to keep him out of power. And,
What's the truth to that?
if they want to keep him out of power so badly, he must be doing something right. Like, there is a way in which the anti-elitism, anti-institutionalism, that I think Trump has both tapped into and then exacerbated over time. How much this ultimately, I think people couldn't understand. It's turned a whole bunch of things on its head in terms of old rules. And you just used a word that I think is like almost at the center of the difference with people, which is filter, the sort of media filter, which is no longer, right? It used to be like, why did Nixon resign? Well, like, because the media could put the kind of pressure on them, and voters, everything that they read, everything that they consumed was filtered through the lens of the media. And that media had an enormous amount of power, and it just doesn't anymore. It is no longer a filter. And so people are getting their information in much more disparate ways, that is creating just all the old rules are out the door.
As a Florida man, I'd be remiss in not pointing out that famous Florida group Lynyrd Skynyrd, which wrote Sweet Home Alabama, says in there, "Now Watergate does not bother me. Does your conscience call on you?" And if the media that we have today, the diffused, disaggregated media that serves a lot of the disaffected, existed back then, that sentiment, "Now Watergate does not bother me. Does your conscience call on you?" They'd be like, you know what? Nixon's strong. He went to China. He's ending the war in Vietnam. Yeah, I doubt he would have resigned.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of at the core of so much of it. So now, if you're a more sort of authority skeptical, low social trust kind of person, you're probably more excited about the surrogates Trump has surrounded himself with than I am, let's say. So I want to play some of the sound, because this to me has been, look, we've done a lot of focus groups since Trump got elected in order to, just check in with people, especially people who had voted for Biden before, and figure out why did they vote for Trump this time around, especially people who didn't vote for him multiple times. Like, they had lots of opportunities to vote for him, kept taking a pass, and then they suddenly came around to him. And we were trying to figure out, what are the reasons why? And one of the big ones has been sort of the Elon RFK, like it is the surrogates that he put out there. So let's listen to voters talk about that.
So this time around, the last few years, I shifted to watching more independent media, which covers both. And also, like somebody said on TV, I said, this is exactly me. I did not vote for Trump. I voted for Elon Musk. I voted for RFK, which I really loved him and his position. I voted for Tulsi Gabbard. I voted for Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson, and then I voted for Trump. So it's a team. And I love the fact that they represent, running country as a business.
The first time he won, he really didn't think he was going to win. So I think he took it as a joke. And it was all about him. And he kind of did his New York thing that I'm used to seeing Trump do. So this go round, I think if he's got Elon Musk, who's all about technology, and he's got RFK in there, who's all about the healthcare and cleaning up, the environment and getting rid of these pharmaceutical companies that are running the country.
I am not a Trump fan. I think that he is divisive. He inspires hate and disrespect. However, the things that I appreciate about him, first of all, it is putting Kennedy in his cabinet. I have mad respect for Kennedy. I feel like he will be a real asset to the administration with trying to improve our food supply and just make America healthy again. That's one thing. It appears that he's going to get Elon Musk involved, and I appreciate that. And Vance is a bright guy. So I like that he's surrounding himself with innovative people who kind of understand what the next generations need and their concerns. Also, he's going to have a much stronger hand with immigration, which is needed. It is a huge problem.
I wanted a world that's going to be here for my granddaughter who's 10, okay? And I want the waters cleaned up. Everything that Robert Kennedy did around New York and the harbor and everything else and all these other pharmaceuticals and cleaning up all the environmental messes, I want that to happen. And if they're putting Trump in the office by doing that and you put RFK behind some of those problems, we could start to work on making this a better place going into the Aquarian age. I would have voted for RFK, but since RFK came on to his platform, I thought, okay, well, he can at least fix the healthcare. He can address the pharmaceutical industries. He can address, hopefully in different perspectives, they will ask his opinion about something else. That's why I really wanted to win the election.
We're talking about efficiency. Who was more qualified than Elon Musk to make something efficient?
I was willing to give Kennedy a look at because the family, just all of the Kennedys seem to stand for like good things as far as I am aware. So I was willing to actually give him a shot, especially over Biden and Harris. But then once he dropped out, then that pretty much solidified it that it was definitely going to be Trump vote then.
I hope he doesn't spend a good deal of his energy and time and resources on trying to get people back who haven't been kind to him. I appreciate that he's got Kennedy and Elon Musk and making a cabinet that will allow him to focus on where his strength is, which I believe will be immigration and foreign policy.
So, I've been giving talks so after the election, or I've given a few. I was overseas and people were asking for analysis around the election. One of the things that I have found remarkable and that I point out to people that kind of makes them go like, oh yeah, is when I'm like, hey, if you go back 10 years, Tulsi, Elon, RFK, Joe Rogan, and Trump himself. And obviously, did I say RFK? But I meant RFK. These are all Democrats. These are all Democrats 10 years ago. And so there is something interesting about the way that they have been able to. And you hear in there, and this is, if I had to point at the one thing that I think I was the most wrong about, it's how much I heard people expressing dislike for Trump, just constant dislike and dismay and opposition to his retribution and how much they didn't like it. How many of them were still going to vote for him anyway? And that many of them told themselves they could vote for him because of Elon and RFK and all these other people. And for that really built a permission structure. I love to talk about permission structures, but it built a real permission structure for people who consider themselves more on the left, but not really Democrats. They weren't like committed to the Democratic Party, but they had previously seen the Democrats as the party of the people who are going to clean up the environment, take on big companies. And now they see sort of the Trump world as that. Do you think that the conventional wisdom kind of missed this?
I do. I think the conventional wisdom also missed how much the assassination attempt
we're going to get into that.
Okay,
yeah.
how much that the lawsuits actually built Trump's brand as a badass. We missed just how important that would be, not just in the primary, but in the general. And one of the things I think we also underestimated, I certainly did, was the acceleration of Americans' loss of faith in institutions. And over the weekend at the Harvard Kennedy School, the heads of the Trump and Harris campaigns, Harris-Biden, Biden-Harris, whatever you want to call it, were there. And Rob Flaherty, the deputy campaign manager for the Democrats for Harris and Biden, had lamented that the mainstream media was the left's megaphone, and how the voters they needed to reach were no longer there, because the mainstream media is a thing of institutions, and the Democratic Party is an institutional party. And these voters that they're going after here are anti-institutionalists. There was a loss of faith. I think I used the word unraveling or unwinding earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Trump is the beneficiary of that. In the past we had, outsider establishment versus non-establishment, but non-establishment here really means sort of representing the alternative world to what we have commonly accepted as being sort of the ground rules for how things operate.
Yeah. Just on the RFK in particular, since he was in the race, and he was not polling super high. I can't even remember what he was nationally, sort of at the end of things.
He got up to I think he got up to 5 or maybe even 8 at one point, but I think
but then it had come back down, as time, he wasn't super popular. But I will say, I did a lot of groups when I was thinking about who was persuadable. I remember I did a group a group from Arizona, and the people who were really down on Trump, frustrated with Trump, a lot of them didn't want to go to Biden or ultimately to Harris. Like their second choice was RFK. And I remember being on TV, I think I was on Tapper's show, when something happened where it led the discussion to be about who does RFK pull from? Like who is RFK? And I was like, from Trump. Like the overlap that I was seeing,
yes,
is that the people who, I saw him as pulling more from Trump than Biden, meaning that people seemed more, people who were kind of into Trump-ish, but just ish, really liked RFK, which meant that once RFK dropped out and endorsed Trump and made it clear they were tight, that moved a real chunk of people.
Yeah, I wrote a story for us about a Trump world consultant lamenting RFK being in the race at the time, saying that he appeals to the fuck the world voters, and those are our voters.
Yeah.
That's what they thought. And I'm not saying everyone here in these focus groups are of that ilk, but there is that loss of faith in how the world is operating currently. I mean, it is a thought experiment. If inflation wasn't so high, would we hear these same responses? I think the inflationary picture for a lot of these working class people, all younger people, especially nowadays, whether it's Biden or Trump in office or Obama, well, hell, I even remember I graduated under Clinton, is that there's a sense when you graduate, like, shit, everything around here is rigged. Well, now you got a candidate who's telling you, oh, yeah, it's rigged. And he's got the whole posse around him saying that's rigged. And they include the richest guy in the world, Elon Musk. So, maybe it's true. These guys are talking to me. I think that's a huge appeal.
The other thing, this isn't in here so much, but it is something that I saw a lot of, which is the RFK. There's an interesting universe now that is completely non-political. And one of them is sports. That's a vertical, and that's where you end up with kind of a barstool sports, but politics overlap that led to a certain kind of voter who was engaging in politics almost like politics was the side hobby of their main hobby, which was sports. And there's another vertical for that, which is wellness, which is an enormous vertical. And, people talking about supplements and smoothies and, RFK.
Seed oils.
Yeah, RFK really
food coloring.
appealed to that group of people, or they were interested in his messaging, which is why you always see him with his shirt off doing like bench pressing and
let's just be very clear. That's not seed oils or anything like that. That's straight up testosterone and maybe growth hormone. Okay, just to be very clear about that.
Yeah, like I don't know
for
that
all you folks out there,
with it, whether it's his brain worm or I'm not sure that RFK is like the top-notch guy to be dispensing health advice, but
the guy who said he did heroin and helped him with ADHD.
Yeah, or just was like, maybe I'm going to eat this bear. Maybe I'm just going to drop it in Central Park. Like, whatever. I'm going to travel. Like, is a weird dude. But he really was able to, I think, infiltrate that sort of vertical of wellness, which is just a big online space that kind of infused people who don't think about politics that much, but think about wellness an awful lot with like, oh yeah, this guy's cool. And oh, he's endorsing Trump. We're going to make America healthy again. Like I see MAHA now, MAHA, as a kind of RFK type voter. Make America healthy again. This all bought Michelle Obama a lot of ridicule. Back when I was coming up, there was, the nanny state of Bloombergism and telling people they couldn't have their big gulps. Republicans were like, don't you tell me I can't have my big gulp.
I want this diabetes, goddammit. Yeah. And
I was for that. My libertarian heart, said, yeah, people should get to do, but that is not where we are anymore. So, what do you make of all of the different ways in which, and how did it change? Like all of the different ways people could find an entry point into Trump now, and how has that changed and sort of over the time Trump's been on the scene?
Well, one interesting thing just related to RFK is a friend of mine whose wife travels in lots of alternative medicine and health and healing circles, said that all the yoga people are with RFK. And a friend of mine who is a yoga instructor, I asked him that. And he said, oh yeah, even Maha is great because in Sanskrit it means great. You see like Mahayana and stuff like that. So that's one of those unavoidable coincidences. The thing that I think that the common through line for a lot of these people is they all belong to groups that are ridiculed at one point or another by more establishment voices, more voices on the left who, are on social media like, oh, that's, you're crazy. You're talking about vaccines and all that's like how, you guys are conspiracy theorists. So a lot of people who've ever been called conspiracy theorists, whether fairly or unfairly, finds an entry point there. Anyone who feels disaffected by this situation, the society or the establishment, as I keep using that word, they find an entry point there. Anyone who, not anyone, but lots of folks who had problems really struggling with inflationary pressures, they had an entry point there. So I think there were multiple ones.
Yeah. Okay. We heard another common theme from these groups that we heard a little bit in those last two groups, and that you brought up kind of. You brought it up in sort of a different context, which was that the assassination attempt made him seem like a badass. I gotta say, in these post-game focus groups, we've just heard a lot of people talking about like a kindler, gentler Trump. Like this idea that, they felt like he's really learned a lot. And they felt like the assassination attempt he's really calmed down. You hear people saying this, like other leaders, that, it's not the same guy we saw in our first two campaigns. He's much more level-headed and serious. I just want to play a smattering of this because we just heard a lot of this.
I listened to podcasts that Trump had, and I think Trump toned down his rhetoric a lot. And I realized listening to him and not just listening from what pundit says on TV, like excerpts from the speeches, that he's kind of like, he's smart, he's a comic, he has a very dry sense of humor. Like I'm like, man, I didn't realize this guy was this way, right?
I think that, during his first time running, he was like abrupt, arrogant. And I think he finally got a good PR team that basically told him to shut his mouth sometimes. And I feel like that was his biggest downfall through everything. It's like, you know, the little misogynistic comments that turned one person away, even though maybe his actual like economic views are great. So I feel like he's already gone through that cycle of he admitted he put the wrong people in office because he trusted, you know, people in that political arena.
I also feel like this time Trump seemed to calm down a little bit. I still don't love him or anything, but he seemed a little bit more humanized. I don't know if it was after the assassination attempt or just, I don't know. He just seemed, something about him seemed a little bit more humbled or humanized.
He's actually changed a lot in my view. Yeah, he was taken to court and all that, but he's more forthright with everyone. He may say crazy things, but I've actually come to like look at a lot of things that he said in the past, and he was actually right. He may not say things politically correct, and it may come across bad, but in the end, he seems to have a point on a lot of things.
I think that he's kind of been a little bit shell-shocked by the amount of legal proceedings he's had to go through and the attempts on his life. I'm hoping that it makes him a more understanding and gentler person.
So, the kindler, gentler, more low-key Trump.
You know, I don't
remember that guy.
I'm going to agree in this regard and try to make sense of this generally, is that Trump is 78 now. When he first ran, he was 70. He's therefore what, like 10, 11% older. 78 is old.
Yes.
And if you go back in time and you look at Trump of 20, not that long ago, 2016, and the whole brand of Trump before then, it's much more energetic, much more kind of up and in your face. This Trump is more low key because he's older. His speech delivery is a little slower. He's less snappy. And so, yes, there is that. I think people are taking his kind of calmer tone as a result of age. You know, quote Carlito's Way, the movie, you never reform, you just run out of steam. And they are then using that as the lens to see these other things. They are right that he had a better team around him this time. That team never tried to tell him, hey, don't tweet that. But they were lucky enough for the majority of this race that Twitter had him banned. And then Elon Musk had him back. And then as a result, he only had his Truth social media platform that he was posting on. And he was posting crazy things on it, right? Or what we in the establishment think are crazy things, I should say. And that didn't really break through the way it did before because on Twitter, he had a much bigger following. I think those different factors should be accounted for here. And I do think he was a little less inclined to just shitpost all the time, in part because he didn't have all of these people in the campaign telling him not to shitpost. There's an aspect of Trump, which is part of his appeal, but also part of his problems, which is he has, I'll be armchair psychologist because my wife accuses me of it as well, oppositional defiance disorder. If people tell him not to do something, damn it, he's going to do it.
Yeah, so the kindler, gentler thing, when I was hearing this all over the focus groups, I didn't hear a ton of it prior to
interesting.
Now I heard about the assassination, and I guess I heard some people be like, I think he's changed, right? But like, it just really, I don't know. I felt it hit me harder this time. Now, we were doing a lot of groups in this category of people who had changed their mind about Trump. So I think that's why probably. Yeah. But it was all over these groups. And I think it sort of reminds me, I think your answer is actually quite a good one. It reminds me of The Office. You use Carlito's Way. I'm going to use The Office, where that crazy old guy, Creed, he's like, I want one of these blogs. And they set him up like with a word, like on a word, you know, they just open up Word and they put at the top like creed.blogspot.wordpress. And so he's just like ranting into like his Word document. Yeah. And Truth Social did that for Trump. He was more or less ranting into the void. Like sometimes people would push things onto Twitter, but it almost didn't feel like Trump because it was a screenshot of something else, the simulacrum of Trump, like his cheap imitation. And so didn't have that. And you are right. I think what we read, because I think we would see this, you'd watch as I have been forced to do, watch many of his public appearances and his speeches.
Oh, I watched everyone toward the end, man. It was like, well,
and he does sound old. And so you kind of wanted to be like, man,
Yeah.
everybody's after Biden because he's so old. Trump sounds old. But for Trump, it actually was reading to people like, well, he just seems calmer. He just seems like, how much damage can the guy do? He's 78 years old. He's like everybody's, grandfather. He really was benefiting from that.
The Mario Cuomo quote is like the philosopher king now, right? And that sure stuck. But what's interesting is there's also a possibility. There's a really great book called The Subliminal: How Your Unconscious Mind Rules Your Behavior. And it talks about the way in which our minds process information. And this recalls, and I can't recall it directly, stuff I read in there about how, after the fact, we can create these sort of memories of how things are. And there's also a possibility, you talk about how after the election, now everyone has this sense that could be people just sort of processing, saying, okay, well, why did I? Well, he seems a little more calm and blah, 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 blah. So I think that also might have an effect. The Trump campaign did, before the RNC, the Republican National Convention, try to message the kinder, gentler, philosophical Trump. They got the New York Post to write a piece about it. He sat down with them and said, after I got shot, I'm thinking more, et cetera, and I'm calm. And so then he didn't speak for a week, which is rare for Trump at the convention. And he showed up, and as I wrote at the time, it was like the Republican Caesar sitting in his box at his sort of Coliseum. I know there's some jerks out there going to say Julius Caesar wasn't there when the Coliseum was built, but just so you know, the 12 Caesars existed and it was built later. But sorry to diverge here.
This seems like a fight you're having with somebody else.
It is. It was months ago. You can strike that. Anyway, so you had Trump sitting as this sort of, this emperor who's looking over the Republican National Convention. And when it was his turn to speak, when it was Trump's turn to speak after a week of being quiet and his campaign messaging that he was different and philosophical, for the first 19 minutes, as I reported later, quote, I gave the speech you guys wanted me to give. And then, he said, I said what I wanted to say. And there are two speeches in one at that convention. There's the first 19 minutes of him trying to be sort of more contained, more controlled, more calm and philosophical and thoughtful. And then the rest of it was just sort of that unhinged revenge fantasy stuff that he never shook and never intended to shake and never did.
Yeah, but so there's a lot of times where I really understand where the voters, I guess, where they're coming from. I understand why they're saying what they did. I understand what could have telegraphed that. And your point about him just being older and, that he's not on Twitter, that resonates with me. But the idea that Trump was a kinder, gentler Trump is also insane. He ran a masks off campaign. And you think about
I'm
his
not subscribing to that theory, just to be very clear.
But he ran a masks off, no, I'm gonna say that the election was stolen. I'm gonna
poison of the blood of the country.
The poison of the blood of the country. And that his closing Madison Square Garden speech was full Trump. It was full, here's what you're gonna get. And so I guess I'm a little bit man, people just were not seeing him either they're retconning it for themselves to say, I think he's learned his lesson, like a Susan Collins thing. I really think he's learned something here. And they're just trying to justify their vote. Or there was something about the way that people maybe didn't pay that close attention to Trump this time because he's so familiar. And so whatever it was in the vibes, whatever it was about when they saw him in short little bursts, they were like, yeah, he's still a little bit of crazy, but he seems more chill this time. I think he'll be okay.
I think that's it. Just to reinforce, don't underestimate how important it is to sound non-threatening. In his case, it was old. But one of the things that JD Vance and Marco Rubio, just to name two, who are the vice president and now soon to be Secretary of State, excel at is selling their ideas, which are very conservative. And when you poll them, in some cases, are not in line with where the majority of voters are. And they package it in a very reasonable, digestible, easy to swallow way. And tone matters and presentation matter. And so I think in the case of Trump, don't underestimate just the fact that he did sound a little more tired, a little more calm, and therefore he sounded less crazy. Also, he did run a more competent campaign, won a majority of the vote, won a majority of these swing states, did it quickly and by relatively large margins. And that also might play into people thinking, well, he sort of learned his lesson this time, because you know what? He had a good campaign team that didn't do crazy shit. The candidate did the crazy shit, but not the campaign. And they had fun too. The guy showed up at McDonald's. He served some fries to some fake customers. He then had this controversy over garbage. So what do? They got a garbage truck and he drove around in it. And it worked.
I thought at the time that seemed really dumb, because I was like, you're just extending the fact that you called people garbage, but like listening to voters, they also heard that Biden called people garbage, and like, you know, it just
don't underestimate with Trump, which is one of the things that I didn't get at the time in 2022, which is like, one of the things that came across is this guy basically won re-election to the primary in large part because he got indicted. And he got indicted initially mainly because he purloined national security documents, lied about it, hid it from the feds, and fought them tooth and nail and basically forced them to indict him. Crazy shit at the time that no one should ever do. But because he did that, it helped him win. Like, so the things that we think are common sense, he violates with a certain sort of relish and reflexive nature that somehow works out in his favor. So similarly, he has a comedian who makes a joke about Puerto Rico being a floating island of garbage. And then, you know, Biden screws up and says garbage, and they decide to ride this pony and get a garbage truck and draw attention to it. It really puts the old saying that if you've got a problem, hang a lantern on it. That's like a halogen light. And well, I think it worked for him. It works.
It certainly worked with some of these voters. I mean, I guess I just, you know, and I think it really goes back to your filter point, where a lot, like, I remember him on the stage for the debate with Harris, where she just destroys him. And he's up there howling like a weirdo. They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. And you think, who's going to elect this lunatic? And, you know, and it's the Americans are. But
by the way, that made for great TikTok. It was all over TikTok. They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats. People put a beat to it. They were dancing. They were doing like the eating the cat thing. The media is doing things. Social media and mainstream media, or better said, like news media, are increasingly intertwined. Media is doing things. People are gaining information in just totally different ways now. So I don't want to go this far and say that helped him, but the TikToks of eating the dog, eating the cats, and making it sort of popular and funny wasn't as harmful as to Trump as maybe that would have been in a prior media era.
Yes. No, I think in a prior media era, he would not.
He should have been toast.
Yeah, he would have been toast for a million of these things. And I think part of actually the election cycle, like, because now I've been very focused on this throughout a number of cycles, and I've watched how the influence of mainstream media has waned.
Oh yeah,
in the
mainstream media is the big loser of this election, and that's according to one of Trump's top consultants who told me that. I talked to them after the Harvard Kennedy thing, and that's what they said.
I'm not sure that the mainstream media wouldn't say they're I was doing like this deal book thing, and I can't remember. I think it was Maggie Haberman who was saying, you know, there's no doubt. Maybe she was talking to some of the other reporters. Major Garrett was on there, and so was John Carl. But like, just I think they're grappling with. I think the mainstream media itself is grappling with the fact that
it's pretending to grapple with it, but ain't going to do anything to change it. Watch.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a creature of mainstream media. I worked for NBC. I worked for Politico. I know how those guys think, and ultimately they think, well, we didn't get it wrong. The voters did.
Well, I think they're aware that their influence is waning.
Well, they should be, but the honchos who run these things don't figure out why. One of the things that woman from the podcast, or better said, from the focus groups from Ukraine, I believe, said was that she liked Trump. She used the word authenticity. And I think this is one of the things with the Bulwark. We're an authentic publication. Authenticity is the coin of the realm.
Coin of the realm.
And it has allowed the phoniness of mainstream media, especially TV, but all of it sort of meshing together. You watch like ABC's This Week. I watched it this Sunday, and I suddenly felt like I could totally see why all these people don't trust the media. It just looked like a propaganda fest. Is they don't think it's real. You got the same people from DC talking about the same things, giving the same sorts of opinions, and it just doesn't represent a whole bunch of people. I'm not saying a whole bunch of people are correct and that they all need to be platformed in some sort of messy, loud media democracy, but that's what we have now. We no longer, media-wise, have a republic with sort of these, established figures representing the people, so to speak. It's a free-for-all. It is a very democratic media environment.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this DealBook event, and one of the things that happened early on is that the way that McCarthy or Jason Miller or Kellyanne Conway were talking about the public, because they were like, well, the public doesn't trust the FBI anymore. And you're like, yeah, because you guys told them it's a deep state that's after them. And it's like, the public doesn't trust the mainstream media. I'm like, the ones you call the enemy of the people. Like, there's no there's like no awareness that they have had a real role in trying to dismantle people's trust. Now, I think that it's a little
It's the
chicken
hot
and
dog
egg.
guy meme, right? Like, who crushed this hot dog car? Like you, the guy dressed like the hot dog guy. Yeah, I mean that's how it is.
That's right. There is it is some of that distrust was there before. They recognized the distrust. They recognized they could exploit the distrust. It's like Kevin McCarthy, at one point he was, I forget what he was saying. And I'm like, yeah, because you lie to people. Like, why do they believe this? You lied to them, Kevin. You tell them that the election is stolen, and then they believe the election is stolen. And so, and then they use the fact that people believe it as like a shield from like what the truth is. And I don't know what to do. Like, in some ways, there's elements of the democratized media. There's elements of the it being more authentic that obviously I believe is good and we're a part of. On the flip side, the fact that there is and look, I think a lot of the people who fancied themselves arbiter of truth weren't very good at it and let people down. And there's lots of reasons, but at the same time, people do not know where to go for real information, and people don't know who to trust. And we are now at the trust deficit is allowing people to fill that with a lot of garbage. And to bring that word back.
Misinformation, disinformation are demand side problems to a great degree. I do think, again, as a creature of the mainstream media, I do think that this election and the Biden White House could have been covered in a much better way by a lot of these legacy outlets, which didn't, and which came across to tons of people, including me, again, a mainstream media character, as pretty biased, despite a lot of the media critics out there who say, oh, the problem is the media is amplifying Donald Trump. Well, to go back to that Kennedy School event over the weekend that featured the Trump and Harris campaign managers, Harris's campaign manager said the mainstream media is our amplification tool or vehicle. They didn't say that about the mainstream media for Trump. So the more that gets done by the press, so to speak, the more it's going to lend credence to the argument that they're not fair and they're not fair arbiters. But I'm not so naive as to think that that all of the criticisms about it are done in good faith. Most of them are not, the ones you just mentioned there, or that remedying that problem is going to bring people back. I just think it's going to be a long process. But ultimately, sites like the Bulwark are going to grow, and sites or viewership on networks like NBC are going to decrease, in part because there is this authenticity issue. The shows that you see on television are they don't have that gritty reality that podcasts do. Like, the podcast space has just exploded on YouTube. Like, we know we're part of it. And that's because you have these authentic, real conversations with people. And like, there's no 30-second commercial break to tell you about the new catheter you got to buy, right?
Yeah.
That might come a little after.
Well, sometimes we throw in a little factor, a little one scan,
Why
we got
not?
our things.
Got to pay the bill.
Okay. I want to wrap up by talking about JD Vance. We've spent plenty of time on this show discussing how Vance is unpopular with the Trump to Biden swing voters. So A lot of those college educated suburban voters, which by the way, they were the one place, like we spent a lot of time talking to those people. It's the one place where Harris did fine. It's the one place where she basically held steady. It was all these other groups that she slid with. So, listening to these other pool of swing voters, these sort of Biden to Trump voters, they were much more open to JD Vance, with some exceptions, but more open. So let's listen.
He was a nice addition, I don't want to say breath of fresh air because that's not the correct term, but just a different air, and as opposed to the Mike Pence, just a little younger, maybe resonates with more people that he wants to bring on board. So it did make sense, and I enjoyed what I heard from him, especially right after they conceded and they won the presidency. What his little short, maybe 30-second speech was good.
I like JD Vance. The more he speaks, the more I like him. But I do think Trump would have made a better decision with Tulsi Gabbard. I think she would have been a better choice. He's really good. I really like him, but I think she would have been a better choice.
He's very tactful the way he says things, but not a pushover. And I also saw the movie, and I feel like coming from absolutely nothing and a mother with an addiction and overcoming all that to, at that point, he wasn't even a candidate yet. And he's already come so far by enlisting in the military, and that's how he got his education. I just respect someone who comes from nothing and can make that out of themselves. And him and Trump have complete opposite backgrounds, the same beliefs, but it's interesting how two totally different paths got them to that same place together.
I was very hopeful that someone that came from poverty will understand the people struggling and would want to fix that. That's my hope for him. But it's like every time he opens up his mouth, he just says something that I just want to punch him in the face. Like, he's that guy that's like, women are property, women are only made to have babies. Like, he's one of those. So it's like, oh, you could be really great, but you're a freaking misogynist. And so I don't think much of him. Hopefully I'm, proven wrong, but all his interviews, I haven't been very impressed by him.
He really didn't faze me that much when it came to he's just there. He's a lamp in a living room. He's there. And when he's on, I guess you realize he's there. But outside of that, you just don't pay attention.
I listened to those long form interviews and I watched the movie. It's like even one of my friends said, oh my gosh, like he said about this, old lady being, cats and dogs. I said, listen, anybody could say something stupid. That was really some stupid thing to say. But like you had to listen what he actually has to say. Mm-hmm. And, how he talked about abortion and the fact is like, hey, that's his values. The states have to make that decision. And, Ohio voted against what his beliefs are. And he was okay with that. And so, he totally won me over. And I think it was just such a smart pick because I think this time Trump didn't pick someone who was politically convenient. I think he picked someone like him who has his values. And I think it was so smart because he's successful and he doesn't blow up the world, so the Republican Party is set to have a very successful next, if something happens to Trump because he's getting older. So I became a total fan, where at the beginning I was kind of like what my friend said is like, oh my gosh, he's terrible. I'm like, hold on a second. Let's just listen to what he has to say. So I became a fan. I like him.
Hey, Mark, where is JD Vance right now? Have you seen him lately? What's he doing?
He's been parked at Mar-a-Lago for some time. Now,
doing the transition, or what's up with him?
He's sitting in on transition meetings. He's shuttling between transition in Mar-a-Lago and DC to shepherd, or as they like to say, Sherpa, around these various picks. He is involved. He is doing things. He seems content to hang back as Elon Musk appears much more by Trump's side. But I'm informed, it's been assured to me that, yeah, he's in these meetings. He's talking to all the transition folks, both before and after, and he's helping these cabinet picks. He's basically the minister of the difficult cabinet nominees, portfolio, or that's his portfolio, is the difficult cabinet nominees, and he's shepherding them through.
Oh, that's fun for him. I love when people are like, I think he, him or Tulsi or like whatever, like they take, I just like the way that people read some of these guys as like similar in any way ideologically or what they stand for is pretty wild. But what kind of president do you think Vance is, or vice president do you think Vance is going to be?
I don't know. You know, I say this being long in the tooth at 51 and he's 40. So he's incredibly accomplished. So I don't want to, I can't judge him harshly for being young. So I'm not sure. I hadn't been prepared for this question and no one's ever asked me before and I hadn't thought of it, to be perfectly honest. And maybe that's a suffering on, or a deficiency on my part. But his cerebral style for me sort of reminds me a lot of Barack Obama. So I think he would be sort of a technocrat in many respects, but he is deeply ideologically committed and his people around him are as well. They do represent this sort of new populist, anti-free trade, reduced foreign policy wing of the Republican Party. So I would see him governing as a more isolationist than Trump, and as more in a more kind of populist and technocratic fashion than Trump would, like being much more nitty gritty on trade details and the like. But that's just a guess off the top of my head.
All right, one more brain picking question, and then I'll let you go. But like, do you think Trump is going to do the things that he said he was going to do? Like, what kind of president do you think Trump's going to be? Do you think he's going to, because it's funny listening to these Biden to Trump voters, how much what they kind of want is like, something about the environment, something about, make sure they got clean water. And does Trump care about governing? Like you say that JD Vance is ideological. Does Trump care about governing, or did he just need to win to stay out of jail? And now he's going to like let the rest of these guys kind of do whatever.
I think Trump cares about legacy. And so he cares about governing as a way of saying, I did this and I accomplished this. To answer your first question, is he going to do the things he said he was going to do? Man, it looks like they're serious about mass deportations, and that can turn really chaotic and really hairy really quickly. Is he going to do the stuff about tariffs? I'm no economist. I guess I will confess a weakness here. I was the only person in 2000 in Palm Beach County to intentionally vote for Pat Buchanan because I didn't like NAFTA. I will admit it. I've never been a free trader. At the same time, while economists assure us that free trade is great, at the same time, man, these tariffs he's talking about, if he does accomplish that or some of it, it really could spike inflation even worse. So if the predictions of the tariffs are true as being inflation spikers on top of the immigration restrictionism that he's talking about and the mass deportations, we could be looking at an inflationary period. So folks might hope not, that they might hope he doesn't do what he said he was going to do. But I think he's certainly serious about immigration.
What about the retribution stuff?
Here's where I'm going to be probably wrong. But knowing Pam Bondi, but I also, who's the Attorney General pick, former Florida Attorney General, I don't see her as being the kind of person who would just be flagrantly going after Bob Mueller or Anthony Fauci or stuff like that. I don't see it. At the same time, though,
Patel?
Kash Patel might. Technically he would be working under Pam Bondi. So I would see Kash Patel, because he said he would, as being far more likely to do it. So it's an open question as I sort of kind of struggle through the answer here. I note that over the weekend when Trump sat down with Kristen Welker and said that he thinks that Liz Cheney and company should be jailed, he then said something to the degree of, and I should have the transcript in front of me, so forgive me if I get it wrong, that he doesn't think the DOJ, however, should prosecute them, or his campaign, or Jason Miller.
Well, she asked a follow-up that said, are you going to direct them to investigate these people? And he said no. But they'll do what they think. Yeah. I mean, it was a little bit BS. But.
Correct. Jason Miller, then his spokesperson, was then subsequently out in force on TV saying that, no, he's not calling for the incarceration of these people, and was sort of walking it back a little. So that suggests to me that he's not going to do it, but I think it is increasing the likelihood, which I think was one of the first people to kind of post on Twitter, of Joe Biden doing blanket mass pardons for lots of different people to short circuit that.
Yeah, George Conway and I did a podcast about this where I asked him what he thought about that, and he thought it was a very bad idea. And it'll be interesting to see one of his reasons was that they'd never accept it because it sort of brings this like patina of guilt with
Does it say you have to accept a pardon?
No,
In the
I don't.
Constitution?
Well, you know what? I don't. There was like a
does not.
long argument
I think this is a
about
case
this
where
later.
this is a case where lawyers can be too smart in the law. I mean, the Constitution gives the president the power to grant pardons. Period. That doesn't mean you have to accept it. If you give me a new Mercedes Benz and you put it in my front yard, I might say I'm not going to accept it. But you think I'm going to drive it off the lot?
What do you mean drive it off the lot?
Or drive it off my driveway? Pardon me. Like if you
You
give
will.
me a new, if you give me a new Mercedes Benz, like am I? And I'm saying I'm not going to accept it, but like, do you think I'm going to let the repo man come and take this free car when I'm going to need it? Maybe that's a better way to phrase it. Like, probably
Interesting.
not. I mean, you think about it, if you're Anthony Fauci, if there is a non-zero chance of you being dragged through these investigative processes or having this pardon for you that's just sitting there, maybe like, oh, I don't want the pardon, right? So that scene in Casablanca, I'm against gambling. Oh, you're winning, sir. There's two ways of doing these sorts of things. And I do know that in Trump world, those who were subjected to a lot of the investigations and had to lawyer up and went in debt, there's a huge thirst for revenge just to at least to investigate a lot of people on the left to make them have to pay lawyers. There is a lot of anger and revenge seeking that still exists in MAGA-ville.
Oh, well, on that bright and happy note, Marc Caputo, thanks for joining us again. And
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for listening to another episode of the Focus Group Podcast. Remember to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe to The Bulwark on YouTube, and become a Bulwark Plus member at thebulwark.com. We will be back next week with our final show of 2024 with the one and only Tim Miller. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mark. Bye-bye.
Thank you.